Scott, you've said so many interesting and provocative things. I don't have enough time to dive into all of them, so you're going to have to promise to come back. But I do want to read this. This is something you said about wealth in America. The bottom line is rights and democracy have become purely a function of how wealthy you are in America. The wealthiest 1% are protected by the law but not bound by it, and the bottom 99% are bound by the law but not protected by it. Explain that.
I would argue, Nicole, that we could live in deepest, reddest Mississippi, and if someone in our life became pregnant, we could handle it. If somebody gets angry at me for free speech or saying negative things, I can lawyer up. If things get really bad and they start rounding up Jews as they did in the 30s, and by the way, I don't think there's that much difference between us and Germany in the 20s and 30s. If you really look at what's going on here. I have the money to peace out to Milan or Dubai. There's an emerging transnational oligarchy where you essentially have your own schools, you have your own defense, you have your own health care, you have your own laws. And the shameful or the disappointing thing about that is that it reduces the vested interest in the success and the protection of what is America amongst the most powerful. The reality is your rights are entirely correlated now to your wealth. And there's a bit of a silent conspiracy between the very wealthy and the Trump administration, who clutch their pearls at how terrible what is going on is, but at the same time upload their taxes to ChatGPT, as I have done, and found out they're about to become much wealthier with the Trump tax cuts. You know, the biggest shame about all of this, or one of the biggest shames about all of this, is that if the Trump administration brought the same competence and elegance to governing as they bring to grifting, we'd be in a much better place. We now have a mob family running the United States, but that's bad. But what's worse is Michael Corleone is running the grift and Fredo is running the government. This is a toxic combination of outstanding grift with incompetent governance.
Yeah, I mean, do you have hope that our politics will reject it?
I am hopeful. I think America has survived the worst. I do believe a lot of people, good people, will start speaking out. And I think the key is, if you look at, I mean, this grift makes Putin blush. This is the biggest grift in history. No one has pulled off this kind of grift this quickly. And the way typically there's been successful pushback on grift, if you look at Navalny, who got a lot of traction against Putin, he made a very simple connection. He said, all of these oligarchs in Russia are getting rich, and there's potholes in Moscow. And Senator Warren's message was the right one when she said, they're getting rich and you're losing your health care. So I think when people start connecting the fact that their wealth, their prosperity is going to decline, and they see just how wealthy the people with proximity to the president are getting, I think they will decide to stand up. I'm also hopeful that the Democratic Party will move beyond just the strongly worded letter. And what I'm encouraging them to do is draft legislation that will not pass that says that a country that is operating black sites or a co-conspirator in this kind of fraud will be on the hook in 3 years and 9 months. And that if you're an individual cooperating and engaging in this, the statute of limitations on these types of illegal incarceration or fraud are longer than 3 years and 9 months. I think the Democratic Party needs to start being the party, quite frankly, of not effing around, as opposed to the one of a strongly worded letter. We need to start thinking like them and behaving a little bit more aggressively.
I want to come back to young men. This was from your letter endorsing Kamala Harris and urging her election. And you write this specifically about men. The whole subject of what it means to be a man has become radioactive, infected by a dialogue that feels more like disdain, toxic masculinity, for example, than a conversation meant to address the issue. Young men don't know who they're supposed to be and lack the resources to go out into the world and find out. I know a lot of folks will say this privately, but are still afraid to sort of platform this conversation and really look at the plight of young men as something that has to be, to borrow your word, elegant and thoughtful and not politically toxic. How do you do that?
With data, and I mean, the far right, to their credit, or the right, recognized the problem before anyone else. But their solution was to conflate masculinity with coarseness and cruelty, or to try and return to the time of the 50s when things were better for men. And that wasn't good either because they were just not nearly as good for women. And then on the far left, quite frankly, the advice is for men is to act more like a woman. And I don't think that's the right advice either. I think a data-driven argument about some of the data we cited earlier, and also just a recognition that empathy is not a zero-sum game, that civil rights didn't hurt white people, gay marriage didn't hurt heteronormative marriage. We can still recognize the immense challenges women face in the workplace, especially after they decide to have kids, but also recognize that a 19-year-old male should not pay the price or be penalized for the extraordinary privilege, the unearned privilege that my generation received. I think there are a lot of programs. I think people are recognizing. The dialogue has just gotten so much more productive, Nicole. 5 years ago when I brought this up, I was immediately called a misogynist because there was quite frankly, an understandable gag reflex because the majority of people talking about, quote unquote, advocating for men, it was just thinly veiled misogyny. The way the dialogue has become more productive is the people who have embraced this movement are simply put mothers. And I hear from them every day, and the dialogue is something like this. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters, 1 son. One daughter is at Penn, the other is in PR in Chicago, and my son is in the basement vaping and playing video games. Mothers see what's going on here, and a lot of feminists now recognize that the country and women aren't going to continue to flourish as long as men are flailing. You know what? You know who wants more economically and emotionally viable men? Women. 1 in 3 men under the age of 30 is in a relationship, 2 in 3 women. Why? Because women are dating older because they want more economically and emotionally viable men. How many times have you heard people say, I know all these wonderful women, economically viable, high character, attractive, and they can't find a mate? No, they can find men. They just don't want to find any men they want to date. Our men are failing, and it is really having an impact on our society. And quite frankly, it helps a populist and a nationalist spread a very ugly message and capture the attention of them and the people who are worried about them and start basically spewing hate. And they become receptive to blaming women for their romantic problems. They become receptive to blaming immigrants for their economic problems because, quite frankly, this group has been ignored. It's time to level them up and realize empathy is not a zero-sum game. The last stat I'll give you, you go into a morgue with 5 people who died by suicide, 4 men. If any group was killing themselves at 4 times the rate, I would argue we would move in with special programs and more empathy. And we don't do it because of the unearned privilege that I garnered, and young men are paying that price.
Do you see any Democratic politicians doing the right things?
Oh, sure. I think there's a general
recognition
recognition that something
though, around men, around young men.
Yeah, there's governors who are approaching it from an economic standpoint and implementing more vocational programming. 2/3 of our kids aren't going to get college degrees, and we all knew that guy in high school. He was not going to go to college, but he knew how to fix a car. What happened to Wood Auto and Metal Shop? And even just saying that triggered some people 5 years ago. To even have a conversation that maybe men and women were different and more prone to different skills. Governor Wes Moore said that the number 1 priority for his administration was going to be focusing on the plight of young men and boys. We need to have a very honest conversation around the fact we have the most single-parent households. And let me be clear, I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died as secretary a lot of my life. But the single point of failure, if you were to reverse engineer to when a boy comes off the tracks and descends into trouble, it's when he loses a male role model. And we have more single-family homes than any country in the world. What's interesting is that girls have similar outcomes in single-parent homes in terms of college attendance and income and rates of self-harm. But the moment a boy loses a male role model, he comes off the tracks. What it ends up, the research shows, is that while being physically stronger, boys are emotionally and mentally much weaker. And we need to recognize that and move in with programs. We need more men in K through 12, maybe redshirt boys who are just biologically much less mature. The prefrontal cortex is on average 18 months behind a girl's. More vocational programming, expanding freshman classes at universities. I think we need national service, Nicole, to get people from different sexual orientations, income levels, ethnicities working together in the agency of our country such that they feel more American as opposed to identifying through a specific demographic. A tax policy that stops transferring money from young people to old. Do you realize every year we transfer $1.3 trillion to the wealthiest generation in history, American seniors? And as a result, for the first time in our nation's history, a 30-year-old isn't doing as well as his or her parents. That creates rage and shame. So what do we have? We have the most obese, depressed, and anxious generation in history. And Nicole, do you have kids?
I do. I have a son and a daughter.
Well, you know this. Anyone who has kids knows the following. You have your world of work. You have your world of friends. You have your world of kids. Something comes off the tracks with one of your kids, and your whole world shrinks to that kid. I mean, let's think about this. What is this all for? We talk about AI. We talk about politics. We talk about special interest groups. If our kids are failing, if our kids are depressed, if they're self-harming at the greatest rates in history, then we've lost the whole shooting match. So I think a series of
yeah.
I think a series of programs are needed, and we're starting to finally see it.